Hello, my name is Vanessa Krapps, and I will be taking you through my presentation about oral history and women's stories, a historical look at non-Western history. In today's world, we live in the era where we communicate and record our lives through writing, especially with advances of digital technology that gives us applications such as Facebook, blogs, e-journals, Kindle, and Wikipedia. Much of our history is expressed through written word. With the greater availability of printed works, which was first made possible with Gutenberg's printing press, humans have relied more and more on text and scripts for the spread of collected human knowledge and information. Especially today, with the easy access to the World Wide Web in many countries, there has been a steady decline in the popularity of oral traditions all over the world. According to John Feather in his book The Information Society, some anthropologists believe that the dawn of human history began with the evolution of language. He goes on to say that the print never displaced the spoken word as the most common means of human communication and information transfer. Much of the knowledge that we need in our daily lives has been acquired orally and by example, from the simplest skills which we were taught as children to the immense complexity of the language itself. Using written language as a form of communication and record-keeping of human knowledge grew out of a time that predates written record. For thousands of years, humans existed in a dominantly oral world where collected human knowledge couldn't be conveyed with the aid of scripts. If you put the history of humankind in perspective, the majority of human knowledge and history existed only in the mind. Oral traditions have been an essential tool in the survival, education, morality, and development of the humankind. Because of this rich history that oral traditions can bring, many people and organizations have decided to record and preserve oral traditions from all over the world. There are three types of oral history records. These are oral history interview, project, and collection. Oral history interviews, which are usually in the question and answer format, are conducted by an interviewer with some knowledge of the subject being discussed. Oral history projects are a series of oral history interviews focused on documenting a topic, theme, era, place, organization, event, or group of people. Similar to this, the oral history program is just a continuing series of oral history projects under one management. There is also the oral history collection, which is usually put together sometime after the interview recording and are usually a series of records performed during interviews not associated with an oral history project. Oral history can be recorded with transcripts only, sound recordings only, video recordings only, or with multiple physical formats. I would like to take the time now to give some examples of oral history records. In the PBS special about the reading program in Nepal, we learned about a little girl named Sabina Timosina. The video is an example of an oral history interview using audio and visual recording. Not only were we introduced to the program started by John Wood called Room to Read, but we got the chance to hear Sabina's voice and witness her reactions to her situation and the people around her. Tommy Boy's Lesbian Men and Ancestral Wives is a book written by Ruth Morgan and Saskia Warenga that documents the same-sex relationships between women in East and Southern Africa. With the aid of 6 other women activists from Kenya, Namibia, South Africa, Botswana, Swaziland, Tanzania, and Uganda, they were able to document the experiences of their interviewees and the dangers of being out in African countries where homosexuality is punishable by death in some, and in all the threat of physical violence, including rape, is a constant worry. All of the women who were audio recorded demanded that they keep the audio tapes after recording or have them destroyed. One interviewee refused to be recorded at all. It was essential that the interviewers be extremely knowledgeable about their country's traditions so that the interviewees would see them as insiders and not strangers. These collections of interviews interviews were transcribed and put into a book that demonstrates an oral history project with a feminist and human rights agenda. My last example is Harvard University's Milman Perry collection of oral literature, which is a large archive of song recordings, transcripts, and images that record Bosnian-Herzegovina culture. These collected works were gathered by several interviewers and interviewees performed in the 1930s to record oral epics. The Milman Perry collection is the largest single repository of South Slavic heroic song in the world. Two of the world's oldest religions, Islam and Hinduism, were born from oral traditions. The main texts of Islam, the Quran and the Hadith, and the Vedas in Hindu religion, were recited by practitioners who had these large texts memorized by heart. The four Vedas, with their long and complex passages, are practiced both forward and backward in order to remember the exact order of words. The historical study of Sufism, another part of Islam religion, is based mainly on the biographical dictionaries that for the most part are collections of orally transmitted materials. Even when the written texts of these religious documents became available, the tradition of memorizing passages and reciting them orally didn't fall out of tradition. In relation to this, when the Germans and British first came to the eastern coast of Africa, they discovered a strong, flourishing, multidimensional oral tradition combining prose and poetry in a written literary mode that was heavily biased towards homiletic verses. In many African communities, the history and collected knowledge of their people is passed down orally through generations and is an essential feature in African historiography. According to Masrou and Sharif in their book, The Swahili, Idiom and Identity of an African People, Swahili prose remained essentially oral until a few decades ago. Moral education in these African communities involved the informal use of different forms of narratives, folklore, proverbs, and oral tradition. In essence, the community is an informal education structure. In African cultures, the community, traditions, and elders are the repositories of moral knowledge, beliefs, and ways of life. In poor rural Indian society, many village women hardly have any time or ability to seek out information. These women must rely on the oral wisdom of the family hierarchy. The eldest, or the matriarch, holds generations of information that is passed down orally between members of the family. In 1935, Professor Milman Perry of Harvard University went to Gaco, a municipality of Bosnia and Herzegovina, to record the abundant tradition of women's songs. The ballads that he and some assistants recorded cover stories about pre-married life, married life, parenting, and death. During an interview with the son who recorded his Bosnian mother's folk songs, the son pointed out that the songs were transmitted from one generation to another, perhaps for several hundred years. My mother said, "I have learned this from my mother." When relating a story that his mother told him, he claimed, "She told them to my grandmother, she to my mother, and my mother to me," which is referring to the son's mother. Recording this long-standing oral tradition not only makes the ballads of several generations available to the public, it also demonstrates the importance of their traditions and cultural knowledge. Thank you for listening to my presentation on oral history and women's stories. I hope that my explanation of oral history, the ways it can be recorded, and examples of these oral histories has been enlightening.